about it and you know I'm a theater girl. I think, well, first of all, who else, please just tell me, where are my people? Like, who are the other theater kids? Oh my gosh, there's a lot of you. I love that. This is exciting for me. This is exciting for me. So here's the reason why I think I love theater so much. I just love telling stories. I'm like one of those storytellers, and you know the people where they like have to get up from the table when you're eating dinner with them to like explain the story with their whole body and their hands. You know who I'm talking about? That's me. So I love telling stories. So I thought tonight I would share 3 stories with you. Is that cool? 3 stories. And I love stories, and Jesus actually also loved telling stories too. We've been talking about these things called parables this week. You heard one from Paco, you heard one from Terry, and Jesus loved telling stories to explain a deeper thing about your life. And so the 3 stories that I'm going to tell you guys tonight, I hope that you come out of those 3 stories and hearing those stories having a deeper understanding of something about your life. And I hope that in that what is revealed to you is more about who you are, what your identity is. So, story number 1 is from the Bible. It's a parable. It is a parable that we have tonight. This particular parable comes from Matthew 7. Guys, look, I have a paper Bible. It's vintage. I know, it's vintage. Most of them are on the phones these days. I do like those, but I appreciate a good paper Bible. So this story comes from Matthew 7, verse 24. And this parable is called the wise and foolish builders. I'm going to read it to you. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a crash. Basically, what's happening here is there's these 2 people. One of them decides to build a house. And they build this amazing house. It looks awesome. It has shiplap. And they build it on a firm foundation. They build it on a rock. And then this huge storm comes. There's all this wind and all of this rain. But it's cool because the house stands firm because it's built on bedrock. And then there's this other person. This other person builds the same house. They're building and they're building and they're building. And the only difference of the houses in this story that Jesus told is the other house is built on sand. So same exact thing happens. Wind comes, a storm is there, rain, the whole shebang. And the difference of the house that was built on the sand is the house falls. It just crumbles to the ground. Like we've been talking about this whole week, Jesus tells these parables to reveal something about our lives. And I think when Jesus was telling people this story, and what I think he wants to hear from us today is he wants us to answer a question. The question that he's asking this is, what are you building your life on? What are you building your life on? And there's a difference between the 2, and you actually have a choice. So you have a choice to build your life on bedrock, or you have a choice to build your life on sand. And no matter what choice you make, something's gonna happen, because a storm is going to come, It comes in both situations, but one of the houses is going to stand and one of the houses is going to crumble. And I don't know about you guys, but like, if I have a choice between like a Chip and Joanna beautiful house that's like gonna stand through a storm or this one that's gonna crumble, I'm team house that's gonna stand. I just am. I don't particularly like love storms, so I'm not gonna choose to crumble and die in a house in a storm, okay? So I feel like hopefully you're on the same page where you wanna be in the house that stands. So the question is, well, how? How? What does this mean for our lives? I'm asking you the question, what are you building your life on? How do we get this house that stands? And I actually think the answer is simple. The answer is really simple. You just have to choose. You have to make a choice. You have to make a choice between the house that's on the bedrock, and you have to make a choice between the house on the sand. And the choice is yours. The choice is yours. Are you ready for story number 2? Story number 2. Okay, one person was. Are you ready for story number 2? Cool. Great. Oh, more people are ready. Great. Okay, story number 2 comes from 100 years ago. 100 years ago. I know. Now, I did tell you that I was a theater girl, which meant I did not pay attention in history class, was not interested at all, only cared about history when Hamilton came out. So, okay, yeah. So, I recently learned about a thing that took place in our history, in our country, almost exactly 100 years ago. So I'm going to take you back in time to something called the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl. Oh, you know, or at least some of you do, the people who were not like me, who paid attention in history class. That's fantastic. Here's the deal. I'm not about to give you a boring history lesson. If it was boring, I wouldn't be interested in it and telling you about it. Here's the thing. What happened in our country 100 years ago was, to this day, the most devastating environmental crisis of our country's history. The Dust Bowl was insane. It was wild. So basically, here's what happened. At the time, in the 1930s, there was all of this dust out west. The land was desolate. There was a drought. Things were dying. And here's the crazy thing, and what made the Dust Bowl so terrible, like worst thing that's happened in our history environmentally. There was this thing that the dust created called a black blizzard. A black blizzard. And these blizzards were not just any sort of blizzards. These blizzards were like 200 miles wide. They would go up to 65 miles per hour. They could be up to 2,000 feet tall because they were so big. They would descend and basically like swallow up whole entire towns. The dust was so thick that if you were standing outside when a black blizzard came to your town, you could immediately be blinded. That's insane. There was so much dust that it would create these sand drifts that would go over people's houses, or it would go over fences so their cattle and all of the things that made people money would escape. Not only that, things were dying. So when these black blizzards descended on the towns, it would basically kill anything that was living outside. Crops, plants, people, cows, cattle. People were having dust get into their systems, settling in their lungs, and they were dying. Did you think that you were the only generation that had to go to school with masks? Y'all weren't. You weren't. The Dust Bowl, there was so much dust in the air that people could not leave their houses without wearing masks because the dust would get into their lungs and settle down and create what they called dust pneumonia that killed thousands and thousands and thousands of people. People were shoveling dust out of their homes every single morning. Crazy things were happening. One of the craziest was it was killing things like cows and other wildlife. But for whatever reason, jackrabbits were able to survive the dust. I know, super random. But because they were one of the only wildlife that was able to survive, they were like multiplying like rabbits. And they were like swarming and banding together. And after the black blizzards would descend on a town, days later, these mobs of jackrabbits would come to a town and eat whatever was left. I'm not talking like a little herd of nice little bunny rabbits. No, I'm talking like 7,000, 10,000. There was one recorded event of what they thought was up to 35,000 jackrabbits that descended onto a town. I am not making this up. I'm not making this up. This happened in our country in the 1930s. And you know what was the worst part? It was not the black blizzards. It was not the pneumonia. It wasn't the cows dying. It wasn't the people dying. It wasn't even the jackrabbits. The worst part about the Dust Bowl is it was 100% preventable. And it was 100% caused by humans. I know. Crazy, right? So you want to know what happened? You want to know? It was caused and had everything to do with roots. Now, just like Paco, I don't know a lot about farming. Not a lot. But when I heard this story about the Dust Bowl, I looked into it a little bit. Basically, to make a long story shorter, in the 1920s, right before the Dust Bowl happened, a ton of Americans were moving out west. It was really easy to settle down in places, and the West was just covered with these rolling hills, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of prairie grass. And people decided they were gonna go out west, and they cut it all down because John Deere was invented at the time, and they planted a whole bunch of wheat. Well, what happened is in the West, I don't know if you've ever been out west, but sometimes it's really, really cold, and sometimes it's really, really hot, and the weather isn't always awesome. And when they planted all of this wheat and were making a ton of money, a drought came. And guess what doesn't do awesome in 100-degree heat? Wheat. And it all died. And I told you this all had to do with roots. Well, the wheat, I don't know a lot about farming, but this is what I learned. Wheat has really, really shallow roots. But what has really, really deep roots, like 5 feet deep roots, is prairie grass. Who would have thought? And guess who cut down 100 million miles of prairie grass with deep roots that could withstand the weather to plant wheat with shallow roots that died in the weather. People made that choice. The wheat died. There was nothing to hold down the ground, which created 100 million miles of dust. And then what happened? Black blizzards, pneumonia, rabbits, and a whole bunch of death. And it all had to do with the roots. And I think that we can ask ourselves the same exact question that Jesus asks us in the parable, and that's, what are your roots? Like, what is your life rooted in? I think it's the same question as, what are you building your life on? What's your foundation? Because if your roots are not deep, storms are going to come, just like in the first story. Storms are going to come, and one choice is going to withstand the storm, and one choice is not. So what are you rooted in? What are you rooted in? So we've come to the time for the third story, story number 3. And story number 3, if it's okay with you guys, I'm going to talk to you guys about something that I've never really shared with this many people before. Story number 3 is about my life. Is that okay with you guys if I share with you? Okay, cool. Thanks. I don't know what I would have done if you said no. So I want to tell you this story because I feel like in my life, I have tried to build my life on something, and it was sand. And sand is really anything you build your life on that's not the rock. And spoiler alert to the story, the rock is Jesus. The rock is Jesus. And there were so many times in my life where I tried to build my life on something that was sand, and there's so many ways that you can build your life on sand that you might not even realize. I feel like when we come to church and we come to camp and things like that, it's like, oh my gosh, she's gonna tell me, like, don't build your life on drugs and alcohol. And it's like, yeah, those probably aren't good things to build your life on, but there's so many other things that are building your house on sand. So when I was in high school, I was building a house that honestly looked awesome. And that's the thing about the story, right? There were no differences in the way that the two houses looked. It all had to do with the foundation. So I was building my house, and it looked great. I did all of the right things. I was a really great rule follower. I followed all the rules. I went to church every single Sunday. I read my Bible. I prayed. I was on the worship team for my church. I even had a nickname when I was in high school called Nice Girl. Nice girl, because I was so nice to everyone, and I didn't cuss, and I told people I wasn't gonna go to parties and drink, and I did all the right things. Like, I was that girl. And what's really interesting is I was actually building my house on a foundation that was doing all of the right things. So when I got to college, which a lot of you are going to be going to soon, or you're going to be graduating high school and moving beyond. And I went to college after high school, and when I got there, it turns out that some storms came, and my house wasn't actually built on the foundation that I thought it was. So I wasn't necessarily surrounded by all the people that were supporting me, that I thought were. I just surrounded myself with a lot of sand, like people who weren't pushing me towards the rock, which is Jesus, people who were pushing me to make a lot of bad choices. So slowly, and with every choice that I make, because we have a choice, right? I chose wrong. I chose wrong. So some things that I chose: alcohol. I chose parties. I chose to build my life on things like pleasing other people. I chose to build my life on things like achievement and pushing out anyone in my way, being really catty in theater. Ooh, it's cutthroat, people. It's cutthroat. It's cutthroat. And eventually, even boys. I told you I was going to talk about boys. And I was this girl, right? Like, I put everything, my identity was in being the church girl, was being the girl who did all the right things, was being the girl who had purity. And then when I kept making all these decisions, and eventually there was a night I chose alcohol and weed and boys, and I woke up the next morning and it was all gone. It was all gone. My purity was gone. And that's what my identity was rooted in. And my house totally crumbled. Totally crumbled. And some of those choices were choices and storms that I created with my choices. I created those storms just like the Dust Bowl. They were my fault. I chose them. And sometimes storms have nothing to do with us. They just come. The storm that came today, we had no control over that. Sometimes weather just comes and we can't do anything about it. But the point is your house going to crumble or not? Because for me, it did. And then when my house crumbled, I felt like I had nothing left. Nothing. So I pushed away my family, pushed away my friends, went into depression. It was horrible because I didn't have a foundation. But what I did know about was Jesus. What I did know was there was a choice. There is a choice. And it didn't matter that my life had crumbled. What I'm not sitting here today asking you to do is not make any mistakes. Because you're going to. We're not perfect. I did, clearly. What I'm asking you to do is to make a choice. You have to make a choice between Jesus or the things that are going to set you up, that are going to help make you crumble. They're going to make you crumble. And you have a choice. You might not even know what that looks like or what that means. But Jesus, no matter what you've done or what you've been through or where you've been, look at me. I made the worst decisions. But I have a choice now, something that I have to choose every single day. But I now choose to build my life on the rock because I know now, standing here today, healed and able to tell you I've been there, this is the only thing that stands. The rock is the only thing that your life will not crumble under. And it's your choice. You are the only one that can say yes. And the great thing, the good news is that Jesus invites all of you. Bad news, storm's gonna come. Storm's gonna come, that's the bad news. Good news, Jesus offers you a house that stands. He offers you a firm foundation. He does. He does. He does. But you have to say yes. You have to say yes. So, the question is, what are you building your life on? What are you rooted in? You have a choice. I'm begging you. It's worth it. Choose Jesus. Choose Jesus. God, I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for every single student who's sitting in this room. God, I truly believe with all my heart they are here for a reason. I believe you've created them all equally. I believe you created them all perfectly and equal in your sight. God, I believe that they all have value. God, when it comes to identity, I believe that these are all sons and daughters of you. So God, I'm asking you to move in their hearts right now. God, reveal to them what their life is rooted in. Is it achievement? Is it other people? I don't know what it is for them, God. I don't know. God, I just ask that tonight they would even just consider it being you. God, that the choice that they make now, whether they've been following you their whole entire lives, this is the first time they've ever heard your good news. I pray that the choice that they make tonight would change their lives, forever, so that they can have a house that's built on a rock that would stand for 100 years to come. God, I think that this is the generation. I think this is the generation that's gonna stand. It can only be built on you. So I pray that their choice would be yes tonight to you. I'm so thankful, God. In your name I pray. Amen.